Every victim had one thing in common. It wasn't the nurse, it was the detective who arrested her. And the way he did it, the method, is the part that should genuinely unsettle you. We'll get there. When a nurse named Claire Aldrin was arrested in the spring of 2019, nobody in Harlan County was surprised. The evidence was overwhelming. 4 patients had died under her care inside a 12-week window. Toxicology confirmed potassium chloride in all 4. She had been on shift every single time. Her access to the medication locker was documented. Her fingerprints were on 2 of the IV lines. The case looked like a confession waiting to happen. Here's what everyone assumed. This was a straightforward monster story. A nurse. A pattern. A motive yet to be named, but surely coming. Here's what was actually true. The pattern belonged to someone else entirely. But we're not there yet, because before we get to what Leonard Marsh found buried in the files and what it meant for everyone involved, you need to understand exactly how airtight this case looked, and why that tightness was the trap. Claire Aldrin was 34 years old, 8 years at Mercy Regional. She coached youth soccer on weekends. No disciplinary record, no motive anyone could name. No history of anything that would make you look twice. Stop. Think about that for a second. 8 years, hundreds of patients. Not a single complaint. That detail will matter later in a way the prosecution never accounted for. The 4 victims were not connected to each other in any obvious way. Different ages, different conditions, different families. A 61-year-old retired schoolteacher, a 47-year-old mechanic, a 19-year-old recovering from appendix surgery, a 32-year-old mother of 2 admitted for a blood clot. What they shared, on paper, was Claire, and so Detective Roy Maddox built his case around her. Methodically, over 14 months, he was described in local coverage as thorough, dedicated. The kind of investigator who doesn't stop until the story holds together. The DA called him exemplary. What people thought, Maddox's diligence was the reason justice was being served. What was actually true, his diligence was the reason an innocent woman almost went to prison for life. The story held together perfectly. That should have been the first warning. It wasn't the only warning. There was something else hidden in those 4 victims' histories, something that had nothing to do with the hospital, nothing to do with Claire, and everything to do with why they were chosen. That's coming. Claire's attorney was a public defender named Leonard Marsh. DUIs, domestic disputes, a handful of drug cases. A murder prosecution with 4 victims was not his terrain. But here's the thing about Leonard Marsh. He did something the entire prosecution apparently never bothered to do. He read the files, all of them, not just the hospital records. The personal files, the background on each victim, and he started noticing something. The retired schoolteacher had filed a Child Protective Services report in 2014. The mechanic had filed one in 2016. The 19-year-old's mother had filed one in 2017, when her son was 13. The 32-year-old mother had filed one just 8 months before she was admitted to Mercy Regional. 4 CPS reports, 4 dead patients. Now, who those reports were filed against. That's the part that reframes everything that came before it. But first, understand what Marsh had to do just to find out. Marsh pulled the reports. CPS complaints name not just the family making the report, but the subject of the investigation, the person the complaint is filed against. He requested full documentation through a Freedom of Information filing. The county initially resisted. Why would a county resist releasing CPS records in the middle of a murder trial? Sit with that. When the documents arrived, 3 of the 4 reports named the same individual as the subject of the complaint, Detective Roy Maddox. The 4th report was partially redacted, but the case number matched. An investigation opened and closed within Maddox's own department, internally reviewed, never forwarded to the prosecutor's office. Quietly shelved. Here's what the official record showed: 4 unrelated deaths, 1 guilty nurse, 1 thorough detective. Here's what the actual record showed: 4 people who had all previously tried to report the same man to Child Protective Services, and all 4 were now dead. 3 formal complaints, 1 internal inquiry. All involving children. All against the man who spent 14 months building a case to put Claire Aldrin in prison for life. Here is what makes this story genuinely disturbing. The evidence against Claire was not fabricated the way you might imagine, not crudely planted, not obviously tampered with. It was curated. And the mechanism by which it was curated, the specific decisions Maddox made, and when he made them, is the detail that the forensic review would later find impossible to explain away. We'll get to that. Maddox was the lead detective from the moment the investigation opened. That means he decided which surveillance footage got flagged, which witness statements got followed up, which medication logs got entered into evidence. He controlled the aperture of the investigation. What people assume about criminal investigations, the evidence leads the detective. What research actually shows, once a lead investigator settles on a suspect, the rate at which exculpatory evidence gets documented drops by nearly 40%. That's from a 2013 University of Virginia study. The investigators aren't always lying. They stop seeing what doesn't fit. But Maddox wasn't just subject to bias. He had a reason. Those 4 people had tried to hold him accountable. The system had protected him each time. And then, by extraordinary coincidence or not, all 4 ended up in the same small regional hospital at overlapping moments, during a period when Maddox had a cousin on the facilities board and had visited the hospital twice in the month before the deaths began. That last detail, the visitor logs, came from a subpoena Marsh filed after the CPS discovery. The prosecution had never requested them. Ask yourself, why? Leonard Marsh sat in his car in the parking lot of the county courthouse for a long time after he put it together. Think about what he was holding. A client who looked guilty. Evidence processed by the state, verified by a lab, accepted by a grand jury. A detective with a motive the prosecution didn't know about and might not believe even if shown. And 4 dead people whose families had already grieved, already accepted the story, already decided who was responsible. The thing about a perfect case is that its perfection is the argument. Doubt feels irresponsible. The tighter the evidence, the harder it is to say, wait. Marsh filed a motion to compel disclosure of all investigative decisions made by Maddox during the 14-month case build. He attached the CPS records. He attached the visitor logs. He argued that the detective's undisclosed personal connection to all 4 victims constituted a conflict of interest so severe that every decision he made during the investigation was compromised. The judge granted a full evidentiary review. Here's what the original investigation concluded about Claire's fingerprints on the IV tubing, active handling, intentional contact. Here's what independent forensic analysts found when they re-examined the same evidence: passive contact. The kind that happens when someone brushes past equipment or restocks a supply cart. The toxicology wasn't clean either. The potassium chloride levels, while elevated, fell within ranges that can occur in patients with certain cardiac and renal conditions that 3 of the 4 victims had documented histories of. None of that had been highlighted in the original investigation. And here's the question that the criminal inquiry into Maddox still hasn't fully answered. The one that makes this case something other than a simple story of a bad detective. That question is about access. Specifically, how did those 4 patients end up at Mercy Regional in the first place? And who, if anyone, knew they'd be there? Claire Aldrin's charges were dropped 18 months after her arrest. Maddox was placed on administrative leave, pending a criminal inquiry. As of the last available reporting, that inquiry was still open. What this case exposes is not a flaw in Claire Aldrin's story. It's a flaw in how we read airtight cases. When evidence is overwhelming, we stop auditing the process that assembled it. Read that again, because it applies to more than courtrooms. We trust the conclusion because the conclusion feels complete. But a conclusion built by someone with a hidden stake in the outcome is not evidence. It's a performance of evidence. Here's what the system told 4 people who filed CPS reports: your concerns have been received. Here's what the system actually did: absorbed their complaints, buried them, and left the man they reported free to encounter them again. This time as a homicide detective with full access to a hospital investigation. The 4 people who reported Roy Maddox trusted a system that protected him every time. Claire Aldrin trusted a system that took 14 months of one man's work and called it proof. Leonard Marsh is the only person in this story who read slowly enough to find what everyone else had stopped looking for. The question in any case like this is never just, what does the evidence show? It's who decided what counted as evidence. Every victim had one thing in common. It wasn't the nurse. Remember the method. The part I said should genuinely unsettle you. It's this. Maddox didn't have to forge a single document. He just had to decide what not to look at. That's how quietly a case can be built against the wrong person by the right authority. And the only reason we know any of this is because one overworked public defender decided to read everything, not just the file that was handed to him. If you watch true crime and you've never thought about who assembled the case you're being asked to believe, start thinking about it now. If this is the kind of story you want more of, cases where the truth is buried inside the official version of events, subscribe and drop a comment telling me what you want covered next. There are a lot of stories like this one that never got the attention they deserved.